All right, so for this video, what I'm gonna want to do is I want to make an effect of kind of like a force field look. So what I'm thinking about is to make more of a kind of a pulsating and swirling image that is kind of transparent, because of course force fields you want to be able to see through to see what's on the other side. And so what I've played around with and I'm going to go through and show is using kind of what we did on the previous videos of taking that noise texture and moving it and doing something else with it. So before we get into that, I've made this shader effect too. And one thing about it is that if we click on the fragment, we can see that I have set it to transparent. It's a lit material, and I've used additive blend. Before, we used this alpha blend, which meant that I was going to use that alpha channel. And we used that to filter out all that black. But we wanted the colors to be solid, but the black to be clipped or removed. And we can use the alpha channel for that. In this case, we use this additive. And when you use the additive, it's going to add in whatever colors that we have from this shader and whatever it's shading onto whatever's behind it. And so that will give us that kind of transparent look that we're looking for in kind of a force field looking thing. So what I've done is these were the two groups of shaders that we had, or nodes that we had in our previous shader. And we had one that was moving our image, our noise image down. The other was moving our noise image up. So what I've added to that is two more groupings, and we'll just take a look. What I did is I took my time and I fed it into X this time and kept it Y0. Remember, the last time we were moving it into Y, which moves it up and down. X moves it left and right. And of course we use the 1- to move it bottom to top. And so here I am feeding into the X instead to move it right to left. And then I have one down here that I'm using, and I'm doing the 1- to move it left to right. So we have our four different noise patterns. And before we combine these two patterns and kind of manipulated them to get that ribbon, and we use the color ramp. And this time I want to use the whole image, the noise image, and I'm going to combine them together. What I'm going to do is move these over to here, and let's zoom in here a little bit. So one thing that I haven't been doing is I can grab this guy, and if I release it, it just pops up this create node, and I'm going to do an add. So I'm going to add this item and this item together, like so. Now it gets a lot brighter, and you'll notice where they cross over, right, I get brightness. So at a fairly random situation, but still the brightness kind of moves up and down, and I want this to be kind of balanced, kind of swirl around. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab this guy, make an add node here, and add these two together. And then I am going to grab this here, and I'm going to add these two together. And what happened is it's almost all white. And it's almost all white because remember, the colors can't get greater than anything greater than 1 is going to be solid white. And so by adding all these together, the numbers are getting, obviously a lot of them are way over 1, and most of them are, so I just get this white block, which I don't want, right? So I need to kind of reduce these a bit. So let's delete this and delete this. And we are going to subtract, and we did this before to kind of knock down. I could divide it. There's a couple options. I could divide it, which would just cut everything in half. I could subtract it, you know, and it's hard to say what values will work. So let's zoom in here. Subtract it by 0.5. That's looking better. Okay, let's try that. Again, it takes a lot of trial and error to kind of get what you want, and because you don't really know what this noise is putting out. So we'll just try this for now. Again, 0.5 by 0.5. Now let's see what we get. Let's zoom back out. Let's grab these. Give ourselves a little more space. And we're going to add this now with this. All right, not bad, not bad. I think this may be, you know, what we want. We'll have to see, and we can play around with these values once we see it all put together. And of course, this is white now, and if you'll remember from my other videos, we need to add some color. And in this case, instead of just putting in a fixed color, I'm going to come up here, and I've showed this in previous videos. I'm going to add an external color, and I'm just going to leave it called color. We're going to mark it exposed. Let's just default it to blue. Default doesn't really matter. Blue, blue. All right. The mode, I'll just leave it as a plain color, and I'm going to drag it down here. Let's zoom in a little bit. Let's grab here, and I am going to, actually I'm just going to feed this right into the, oh yes, I want to make a multiply node. Done this before. I'm going to multiply the color times our output there. I'm going to tone this back a little bit. Let's pump that up to 0.6. All right. And then we will feed this into our base color. Move a little bit. All right. So what we have is this kind of random looking output. Let's save this asset. Let's go to our scene. And what I've done is I have created just a sphere. I pulled the sphere in from Blender and put 2 cubes inside of it, so we can see part of it is below this plane, so the bottom half is hidden, so it looks more like kind of a force field that's going over our cubes. If we go to our, let's collapse this down, let's go to our materials, shader effect 2, we can see our color. We could change it to say purple, any color we want. All right. So one thing you'll notice is that if we zoom in here, we can see the point, we can see this seam here, which doesn't look really great. There is ways of creating spheres in Blender so that the faces are more evenly distributed and you don't get that seam. One easy way to get rid of that, you'll notice part of this is below the plane, so I can just come in here, and one way to do it is just to hide that. So if we go here and we do a quick rotation, we can rotate that seam down below the plane. So now we don't see it. Looks a bit better. So I may want to control other things, like maybe I don't want it so bright. I don't know, it depends on how you use it in the game. So I want to do a couple controls here. I want to control the brightness here. So I can come into my shader effect, and what I can do is, right now I'm multiplying that that color, and I'm adding that. Let's move this over here. What we're going to do is we're going to subtract this even more. Let's do 0.7 to make it a bit darker. And then what we're going to do is move this over even more. We will remove this. We're going to multiply this again. And we're going to create a float here. Call it brightness. Drag that guy down here. Default it to 1. We're going to make it a slider. And we can go from kind of 0.2, which would be less bright, to say 20, which is going to be brighter. We will multiply our brightness times our output, like so. Now let's save this asset back to our scene. Select our material, and now we have this brightness. You'll notice, so now I can make it brighter. So depending on what I want, and I can make it dimmer. Right? So actually this probably I won't want to get brighter than that. So I could adjust my slider, but I may want to have a bit more control over that brightness. So let's go in here. These probably are still a little too bright. Let's make this, let's make that 0.9 and 0.9. Save that back to our scene. Well, now we're losing quite a bit of our background. That's probably not what we want. It could be what you want, not for our force field, but maybe for another effect you might want something like that. So we're just gonna have to go in here, and that's a bit too much. Back to 0.7, 0.7. Again, quite a bit of trial and error. Play around with it, see kind of what you want. It's way too bright. It's probably better. So another option, you'll notice that the detail of my pattern, maybe I want to affect that to really get the look I want. So one more thing we could add to this is you'll notice that our noise detail is fixed at 10. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add one more float here and call it detail. Let's drag it right here. And let's give it a slider. Let's default it to 10 since that's what we were before. Let's go a minimum of 5 and a max of 50. Just to see what that looks like. And we will connect that to every one of our scales. So now what I can do is I can affect the scale from my material that's using this shader. So you'll notice that some shaders have quite a few elements, and that's all they're doing is the shader is just exposing whatever variables they want in order to allow you to achieve what you want. Well, that changed the min to the default. All right, so that's like that. So now let's see what happens. Let's go back to our material. Now we have detail. So now we can kind of adjust the detail. And you'll notice that changing the detail gives a different look again to my little force field here. And maybe I like that look and maybe I don't. I guess it's up to you. If you do it like this, you'll notice that the higher or more detail it gets, the faster it gets. So For my force field, I think I want, like, in fact, even lower gives it that better kind of force field look. So I'm thinking this looking pretty good. Now, one thing you'll notice is some places it almost disappears, and maybe that's the look you want. Maybe it's not. We can affect that in one more way. Let's see if I can get this to work. So what we could do is we could clamp the output, meaning right now we let the output get whatever minimum and maximum we want. And so let's see if I can take this output and make sure that the value never gets below a certain amount. Like it never gets totally too black. So we can try, and I'm not sure if this will work because I didn't try this ahead of time, which I usually do. Let's say min. I want the minimum. I think let's see, that's the input. Let's kind of move these over a bit more. Let's grab our little fragment here. Move our color. This to our multiply. I don't think that's what we want. Clamp lets us set the min and max. That's getting what we want. Let's see what that looks like. Okay, it's a little better. What it's doing is it's making sure that the value never gets below 0.1. So we always achieve some amount of color there. See what 0.2 looks like, and we could make this expose this as a variable too, to allow you to change that. Yeah, I like that. I like that better because now it's always gives me at least a 0.2 brightness value. So you'll notice when it almost went dark, I still saw some of my force field, which is what I want to do. So that's looking pretty good. So I'm thinking maybe let's see if we can add any other effects to this that maybe looks good, maybe looks bad. And again, a lot of trial and error, but we'll go through and try to maybe add a bit of other elements that kind of are in this, and maybe play around with some other changes to see if anything looks good. So I'll play around with that, and we'll see what we can do. So I've been playing around a little bit with our shader to see what could we add to make this a little bit more interesting and kind of demonstrate some other effects. So what I did is I added what I'm calling sparkles. So I was thinking, in my force field, I like some other little bright specks to kind of pop up and go away, kind of like sparkles. And it didn't get exactly what I was thinking of, but I think I got some pretty cool effects, and it'll help demonstrate a couple things for our shader to help you learn a little bit more about this. So first of all, I what I did is I took all of our nodes up here and I just copied them and made a duplicate of them down here. And I made a couple modifications. So you'll notice that they're pretty much the same. They take the noise generator. We have our tiling and offset. Instead of 4 times here, I really didn't need, I only needed 1 time node, because really all 4 of these times are putting out the exact same time. So no point in having 4 of them. But what I did is I added some properties here. I created this sparkle speed float. Sparkle speed, that's hard to say. Sparkle speed float, and I use it as a divisor to the time. So essentially, the larger the sparkle speed gets, the slower the sparkles will move. Kind of counterintuitive, but probably could improve it, but that's what I did. So as we increase the sparkle speed amount, the sparkles should slow down. Another thing I did was the scale of the noise. You'll notice the simple noise generates using a scale, and that's just a number. And it can be, from 1 to, I don't know how big it gets. I think once it gets up a certain size, it can't get any smaller. But the bigger the number, the smaller the size of these, the noise pattern is. And you'll notice I defaulted to a different size up here. This is fairly low. Down here, I made the default bigger, but I also exposed that as an external property. So we'll be able to change that with a slider in our game. And we can see what happens when I change those sliders and change the look. And you can really change the look a lot. We'll see what happens once we get through this. So all this is pretty much the same. It's adding the patterns together. But then what I did is I use a subtract. And if you remember, if you watched my video where we kind of had a smoke kind of looking thing just floating up and dissolving away to nothing, I used a subtract in order to get rid of any colors that are below a certain brightness will basically disappear. It'll disappear to black. One thing to make sure you understand, though, is that these are just numbers, and even though the color is black, because you can't get darker than 0 for the RGB, these numbers can go negative, and they will go negative, depending on how much you subtract off. So if we subtract off too much, we'll get a negative color, and we'll kind of see what happens with that. So I also made this an external property so we can adjust the amount of sparkles. So the more we subtract off, the smaller the sparkles will get. So then we come along and I multiply that up because this got kind of dark. So I multiply it by 10, make it a little brighter. And then of course we combine it with a color. And in this case, I made my color an HDR color. So HDR is you can change the intensity versus just a plain color. We use that a lot in Glow. In here, I just wanted to give you an extra, because they're sparkles, they might want to pop a little bit more. So I thought maybe that would be a good idea. And now we have this clamp. So why do we have the clamp? Well, I'll show you what happens when we don't have the clamp. Essentially what we're doing is we're adding this pattern onto our background, kind of our force field blue glow. This blue in here because that's what the color I have. And it adds it on top of each other. And so essentially, if this is 0, these are just numbers, right? You can look, they show it as X, Y, Z, but really it's red, green, blue. And they're just numbers. And if this was negative, then this would actually move a lot of these toward black. Because of course, if the color was, say, 100 and I added negative 50, that 100 would go back to 50. If these were 0, I just want these to be 0, meaning anywhere there's black, I don't want to add anything. So I want the least the lowest number here to be 0, which is why I clamped these to 0. So if we didn't clamp it, let's just show you the output. I'll just drag this and feed this directly in, bypass our clamp, save the asset. Now let's go into our game, and we'll see what happened. Is all of our nice blue undulating glow turned to black because obviously I'm subtracting a lot. So you'll notice that detailed sparkles, no, that's the sparkle amount I cranked way up. And so it's really subtracting a lot and turning all those colors negative, which once I add it onto and combine it, they turn to black. Kind of cool looking though. I mean, it is. It gives a different look, but not really the look I wanted, right? So let's go back to our shader effect. And let's see if I can undo this. You gonna undo? There we go. So now I'm clamped it, so anything that's less than 0 will become 0. And really the max value probably isn't needed. Anything greater than 2 is just going to become 2. So now after I've clamped it, let's save the asset. Now we can see this is what we want. Anything that was black just doesn't add anything. And anything that was above 0, right, is going to add in our sparkle look. So we can see our sparkles, we can see all of our adjustments, and let's see what happens when we adjust these. So if I adjust the detail lower, you'll notice our sparkles got a lot bigger, right? Because all those really not so bright parts like that would just go away if I subtracted off a bigger number. So the more I drag it over here, the smaller the sparkles get just from the subtract. But then I also have the sparkle amount. And you'll notice the lower I make this, remember this is going into the scale value of the noise. And the noise pattern gets bigger and broader the smaller I make this number. And so our I won't even call them sparkles anymore. It is a different look, and it does look cool. I can even make it a little bigger. And then I can change the color, and I can lower the brightness a lot, right? So now maybe it's just a little bit of highlights, right, onto our color. So that's going to be a lot different look than if I change that color to more white. And I increase the sparkle amount. I make them smaller. So that's a lot different look simply by adjusting that. And I can change that sparkle speed, right? I can speed them up. So again, I don't really like that look. I like them a little slower. So you can see just by playing around with these highlight color and those sliders, we can make a lot different look with these highlights on our force field. So we've kind of seen, I don't know if we've ever used a clamp before in my other ones. You can see the value of the clamp, making sure our colors don't go negative. And sometimes you get happy accidents. Maybe if I bypass that clamp, I go, wow, that's really cool. That's a different type of shader. Right? Kind of a undulating star background almost, but not really what we wanted for this. So play around, experiment yourself with all these nodes and make some fun shaders, and thanks for watching.